I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Hardy. I'm the Senior Program Director for Planning and Performance Management here at AASHTO. I want to extend a warm welcome on behalf of AASHTO and the TPM Pooled Fund lead, Christos Xenophontos, from the Rhode Island DOT to the webinar today. Christos was unable to join us because of the previous conflict. For today's TPM webinar, we're happy to see we had 250 people sign up for the webinar. Mike Johnson from Caltrans is a big draw, I guess. One of the larger registrations that we've seen. Just so you know, the TPM Pooled Fund, the Transportation Performance Management Pooled Fund, is sponsored by AASHTO in cooperation with the Federal Highway Administration, one of our key partners. And delighted to support this sort of ongoing webinar series, which is this is number 16. The TPM Pooled Fund is in the process of transitioning to what we call an AASHTO Technical Service Program. So an AASHTO Technical Service Program is sponsored by AASHTO, and all of the state DOTs can be members of that. It's a little easier and simplified process of sort of making payments and everything than if it was with a pooled fund program. If you're interested in more about that, let me know. We can talk through that. But we invite all the state DOTs to encourage your agency to sign up for the TPM Technical Service Program. It's $15,000 a year per state. That money allows us to do events like this, like the Providence Conference that we had. It supports the TAM webinars. It supports the portals, all that good stuff. It does technology transfer. It does, we do have smaller scale in-person peer exchanges that we do fund with that is open to the TSP, the Technical Service Program members. So please, if you want more information, if whether or not your state is a member or is not a member, I have that information. I can get that to you if you want to send me a private chat during the webinar today. As I said, this is our 16th bi-monthly Transportation Performance Management, or TPM, webinar series, sponsored by the Pooled Fund. And again, we have support, from the CPBM, the Committee on Performance-Based Management's leadership, and FHWA. As I say a lot, sharing is caring, and building capacity is critical to the TPM Pooled Fund and now the TSP. This webinar series aims to support the broader TPM community, not just the state DOTs, but local DOTs, counties, MPOs, any transportation agency, as well as the private sector, the consultants, and the research community by sharing lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the transportation performance management community. Was the saying, a rising tide raises all boats, and I feel like that's what this is. Today's topic is innovations in Caltrans Performance Management Framework. Before I review the agenda, I'd like to cover a few brief logistics. First, for more information on this webinar series, visit the portal, tpm-portal.com. Click on TPM Webinar Series under Events in the main menu. Links to the videos and slides from today's webinar will be available there momentarily. And then archived content from previous webinars are also posted on the portal, so you can go out and look at the other 15 that we've done and view them whenever there is a topic of interest or need for your agency. A lot of good stuff there, I'll say. Finally, please keep your microphones muted. You all entered the room muted if you are not speaking, so we can enjoy the presentation without distractions. From the AASHTO perspective, I'm wearing kind of two hats, one with Christos and one with Matt. For the AASHTO, I'm really excited about our webinar format today. You may have noticed if you've attended other TPM and TAM webinars, the typical format is three speakers, and we kind of scratch the surface, provide some breadth. Sometimes there's not a lot of opportunity for depth in terms of discussions and everything. We kind of want to turn that a little bit today and try something new. So today we're going to look at that depth aspect of it, and we really want to focus in on Caltrans performance management approach. And this will give us time to go deeper than we typically have with the 15-minute Q&A after each of the three presentations. And for those who attended the most recent and the Sister Brother TAM webinar series, you know that Michael Johnson was one of our featured presenters last month. During that session, he talked about their innovative performance-based asset management approach. And we hope that session whetted your appetite a little bit to kind of hear more about what he's going to talk about, sort of a broader performance-based planning, performance-based management approach today. It certainly did for us, sort of whetted our appetite, which is why we were determined to bring him back to spend time on how Caltrans has shifted to focus on performance outcomes through its comprehensive and innovative system. Not every state is the same, clearly, but I love you all. All the states are equally favored by me, but we hope you'll agree that Caltrans has a unique and cutting-edge approach in tying together asset and performance management. So with that, let me go on to our overall agenda. So Mike is going to sort of talk about his Caltrans's work and sort of 3 acts. First, he'll put the performance management system in context and provide an overview of how the agency develops its operational plans. Second, he will describe the performance management components of the plans, and Mike will round out the presentation. The third aspect, a discussion on how Caltrans is integrating TPM with performance-based planning and programming and organizational outcomes. Again, we want to encourage a lot of interactivity today. So initially, Mike is going to kind of get through his story. As you have questions and everything, please post those to the chat. It would help if you could say, hey, on slide, the slide that talked about ... here's a question that I had, so we can kind of reference it back. But please, as you have questions or thoughts or ideas, please post them. And if you can reference back to a specific slide that Mike talked about, I think that would be good as well, to kind of help orient us where that question came from. We're all going to leave a lot of time at the end. I think Mike said his presentation naturally goes about 40 to 45 minutes, and then the remainder of that time will be open for Q&A and discussion. When we get to that aspect of it, don't feel like you have to type your answer or your question. Please raise your hand, turn on your camera when I call on you, unmute your microphone, and let's have a discussion that way. So with that, let me introduce finally Mike. So Mike Johnson is the Caltrans State Asset Management Engineer. He has been with Caltrans for 31 years in his current capacity and is responsible for leading the implementation of asset management at Caltrans and the development of the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, the SHOP. The SHOP is a $5 billion annual program of projects that address rehabilitation and operation needs for the state-owned transportation system. He has held numerous national positions with the Transportation Research Board, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and the Federal Highway Administration's Asset Management Expert Task Group and other expert task groups as well. He has published numerous papers in the areas of bridge inspection, bridge management, and asset management. So with that, join me in welcoming Mike Johnson from Caltrans, and Mike, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I feel honored to be presenting on your final day with AASHTO. So before you get off screen, just want to say my best wishes to you and to acknowledge for all of our audience today that you have served in a tremendous way in your time with AASHTO and added so much to the community in performance management and asset management. And we're certainly going to miss you. I know you're not going far and we're going to see you, but really honored to be the last introduction for an AASHTO webinar for you. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay, let me share the screen here. Okay, well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you're joining us from. As Matt said, my name is Mike Johnson. I am with the California Department of Transportation, and my role here in Caltrans is really twofold. One is to lead the implementation of transportation asset management for the state of California and Caltrans, and then also coordinate the development of our largest rehabilitation and operational improvement program in the department. So today, as was mentioned, it's a little bit of a unique webinar in that we get an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper. And really what I'm going to present to you is sort of a cradle to grave view of how we operate within Caltrans. And you'll see as I go through the presentation, there's an integration of transportation asset management transportation performance management, performance-based planning and programming, and a number of other aspects that DOTs typically need to do as an organization, even though it may not be specifically required in regulations, but generally to be providing good service to our constituents, we need to do things above and beyond sort of the minimums that are established in the regulation. So I'm going to go through some of those as well. And so there isn't really distinct sections. I'm going to just show you from the beginning to the end and kind of explain the thought process of why we do things the way we do, and then how it all comes together. So that's what I'm going to endeavor to do. So let's see how it goes. So let's start with some basics of California. We're a large state, and organizationally within Caltrans, we divide the state up into 12 regional districts, and they're sort of shown on the map here. And I'll say that each one of these districts is unique. They have unique environment, unique topography. They have different inventory. Some have transportation assets that are newer. Some have transportation assets that are older. We've got coastal communities. We've got mountainous communities. We've got desert communities. We've got very affluent areas. We have very disadvantaged areas. So the state is very, very diverse. And I say, to my team that every one of our districts has its own personality, much like, every child, they're all in one family, but we all have every child has their own personality. Our districts are the same way. And what's important to the districts varies from one location to the next around the state for various reasons. But because we have such a diverse state, and some of these districts that we have are larger than states in terms of the inventory that they're managing. So one of our districts is bigger in size and transportation breadth than some small states. And because of this, we felt that a more granular performance-based asset management plan was needed. And so we endeavor to operationalize our TAMP and our TPM and to weave it and integrate it in with our business processes. And this is really a story about why we do that and how we do that. So I'm going to start with the top. At the top is the Transportation Asset Management Plan for the state of California. So in this plan, we are looking at portions of the Caltrans owned highway system, but not all of it. And we're looking at portions of the locally owned transportation system that is part of the national highway system. And California is a little bit unique in this regard in that the local ownership of the national highway system is greater than any other state in the United States. And to put that in perspective, in terms of pavement, for example, the national highway system is owned 35% by cities and counties in California and only 65% by Caltrans, or owned or managed. Conversely, bridges are 90% owned by Caltrans, and 10% of the national highway system bridge area is owned by cities and counties. So high level plan in California, if you read our transportation asset management plan, we have 4 primary asset classes: the pavement and bridge, which are federal requirements. Then we also have culverts and drainage systems and our transportation management system elements. So these are things like signalized intersections, ramp meters, changeable message signs, things of that nature. So we really talk about these 4 core assets. And so when you think about the California Transportation Asset Management Plan, we establish a single target for interstate and non-interstate NHS, for pavements, bridges. For state-owned assets, we do that for culverts and transportation management systems. But in a sense, this, if you think about it from a performance standpoint, This is 4 performance measures, 1 state. So it's a 4x1 matrix. Now, given all of the complexities and uniqueness of the districts that we have in California, we felt that to take the concepts that are in TPM, that are in asset management, and put them into practice, we needed to go deeper. Okay, and part of the reason for that is because I mentioned that I manage or help to coordinate this statewide program of projects. And when you look at the funding that we have in terms of the needs on the transportation system, we have $29 billion worth of needs. That's a 10-year number that is included in the transportation asset management plan. But the majority of the things that we have to do on the transportation system are not included in the transportation asset management plan. And so we find that in part because the TAMP and the National Highway System is only a portion of what Caltrans has to manage. And then frankly, it's a smaller portion of what our locals have to manage. But there's all these other things that we have to do and consider. And when we're managing a program of projects, these projects ultimately are competing for funding against each other. So to address this, we developed something called the State Highway System Management Plan. So this is sort of the second step down. So while the TAMP is about 40,000 foot level, the State Highway System Management Plan gets much more detailed and refined. So how does it get more detailed? It includes 33 different performance objective areas. And I use the term objective very specifically because some of those objectives are things like physical asset condition, like pavements and bridges, but some of the other objectives are things like safety, delay, environmental initiatives, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure needs. So the objective word is used to describe a specific thing we're trying to achieve, but doesn't necessarily, and in most cases, doesn't represent a physical asset. But we establish targets for all 33 of these objectives, and we do a performance gap analysis, and we do it at the district level. So what does this do for us that the TAMP didn't? For one, when you start weaving in TPM, and you look at PM1, Performance Management 1, safety, this brings in the safety component. It brings in portions of PM3 because we're looking at delay in travel times, and it brings in climate resiliency all into this performance-based asset management framework. And the granularity goes from a 4x1 level of detail in the TAMP to 33 by 12. It's almost 100 times more granular when we get to the State Highway System Management Plan. And at that level of detail, we feel like, okay, now we're at an operational level or a tactical level where we can implement these, these broad goals that we have in the transportation asset management plan, but make sense of it down at the individual district level. So to do this, we use a number of different performance-based models. Those that have done asset management work or TAMP development or TPM work understand a physical asset model. And this is, in a sense, anything that you could go out into the field and touch with your hand. If you could put your hand on it, it will probably deteriorate. It can be measured in terms of inventory. The condition can be assessed. But the key here is that there's a predictable deterioration model associated with that physical asset component. So any physical asset, whether, in our State Highway System Management Plan, we have obviously pavement, bridges, drainage systems, and transportation management system elements. But we also have things like highway pump plants, overhead sign structures, roadside rest areas, and buildings. We have maintenance facilities, equipment shops, transportation laboratories. It's all part of that physical asset model. Then we have a deficiency model. And so this is a adaptation of transportation performance management concepts. The difference with the deficiency model is that this is something that we feel we need to do to the system, like improve safety. So we'll use safety as our example here. So we want to improve safety, but we can't go out in the field and touch safety. It's not a physical asset. Safety is a outcome of a number of physical assets that you could go touch. But it in itself is not a physical asset. It doesn't deteriorate. But we do know that we want to set targets for safety improvement, which is measured, in our case, in reduction in fatal and serious injuries. And so we build it into the plan using a deficiency model. There is a known quantity of fatal and serious injuries in the state. We want to reduce it by a certain percentage. That's the targets that we set. That's what's required for performance management rule 1 or PM1. And then the question is, how do you get there? And so that's what the deficiency model is all about. And so we use that for proactive safety, things like climate resiliency, stormwater mitigation, and more. And then lastly, we have what we call a reservation model. One of our objectives is to address major damage that occurs to the highway system throughout the course of a year. And this can be significant. In the last round of storms alone in California, we incurred over $200 million worth of damage. And so we need to understand that our available funding, our constrained funding, has to reserve some funding for things that we can't predict. We don't know when they're going to occur, and we don't know where they're going to occur, but history has shown us that they do occur. And so we look at prior years' expenditures in these areas to develop a reservation of funding that can be utilized throughout the year as these unpredictable things happen. So unpredictable things could be fires, floods, slides, earthquakes, and reactive safety projects. So we do react to crashes in some cases, and in those instances, we need to have funding available to go out and affect near-term or immediate safety improvements in these areas where we identified a deficiency that needs to be addressed. So these are the 3 models that we use throughout our plan. Our plan covers a 10-year period. So this is kind of graphically representing what that 10-year looks like. We have a couple different segments. So I'm using the example of our 2023 plan. And by the way, we update this plan every other year. So we'll do 23, then we'll do a 25 plan, and 27 and so forth. But for our 2023 plan, we have 4 years of, we have 3 years of projects that are already programmed, meaning projects have been planned, we've taken them to our commission, and they have funding. And then we have 2 additional years of projects that are going through formal project planning that will be the next set of projects that go to our Transportation Commission for programming. Collectively, those 2 pieces we consider to be pipelined work, meaning whatever that set of projects is going to accomplish from a performance perspective, because they're already financially committed or soon to be financially committed, we capture all of that performance associated with those projects, and we deduct that from our overall gaps. And any remaining gap that we have in our performance management analysis then is viable for projects in the last 5 years. So this light green section. So we have targets for all 33 of these areas. We have a starting point. We know how big the gap is, but we have to deduct from that gap the work that we've already committed to. We also need to deduct from that performance gap the work that is anticipated through our maintenance program in the same period of time. So our State Highway System Management Plan is an integration of maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system. So this is kind of the big roadmap for the 10-year look, if you will. So we do a needs assessment. We got so many things going here. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can get something out of the way. So we do a 10-year needs assessment. This is unconstrained. Okay, so what do I mean? We don't look at how much money we have available when we do the needs assessment. What we're doing is we're looking at where we are today, what our performance targets are, deducting, looking at what that gap is, deducting out our pipeline of work, and we're estimating what it would take to achieve the goals that we've established in our performance management framework. So you could see, for example, I'm showing just an excerpt of this. This is a large table, and I'll show you, there's links at the end of the presentation where you can go look at this whole document if you like. But let's just look at proactive safety. So we have a pipeline of work, meaning in the next 5 years, we will be delivering to construction $1.3 billion worth of work. Behind that $1.3 billion work is a number of fatal and serious injuries estimated to be reduced. But to get to our goal, we would have to invest 3.8 billion more. So over the 10-year period, we need to invest 5.1 billion. We currently have 1.3 billion of that programmed. And if you look down at things like pavement, you could see, a similar approach. Okay, so really the pipeline first 5 years, the gap is really the last 5 years. Oh, sorry, one previous thing I wanted to note. You could see the maintenance component here layered in with the rehabilitation component. So this shop is our rehabilitation program. Here's our maintenance component for those things that have it. And then here on the far right, you could see the Caltrans strategic goal that this objective aligns with. So here, just in this one slide, this is a product of asset management, TPM, Caltrans strategic plan, performance management, all integrated into one sort of comprehensive view, if you will. So this is unconstrained needs. But our funding isn't as much as we need in an unconstrained case. And I'm sure that's probably the case with everybody on the call today. What you need to do and what you can afford to do are two different things. So part of the State Highway System Management Plan, after we do the unconstrained needs, we do a fully constrained needs assessment, or sorry, a fiscally constrained investment plan. That investment plan is then further broken down into 12 different districts' performance plans. So each of our 12 districts get from us a specific set of performance outcomes. How many fatal and serious injuries do they need to reduce? How many lane miles of pavement do they need to rehabilitate? How many square feet of poor condition bridge needs to be improved? And we do this for all 33 objectives, and we give each of our district directors a single budget to do that. Our districts then have to develop projects that achieve all of that performance within the budget that's defined. Okay, and the way that this is structured is such that it incentivizes them to be financially efficient, meaning if they can get their performance done at an attractive price, it's possible that they would have a little bit of budget left over for things that are important to that specific district. And so the funding is theirs. They have to hit all the performance. They have to live within the constrained budget. Okay. And if they do this, then we are guaranteed that the projects that come forward will meet the performance objectives that were established. When we roll up all 12 districts of that, we are ensured that we will get the performance that was defined in our plan. And we know by this process that we have 100% performance-based planning and programming. Our fiscally constrained plan laid out the performance that was required, and projects were specifically developed and tailored to achieve that performance. Okay, so then this is a little bit broader view of what the performance plan looks like. And I will say that the first time we did this, one of the things it does is it shows what the inventory and the condition is for all of these things, even if they're deficiencies, for each of the districts. And the first time we ever put this together, I think it was kind of eye-opening to some of our districts, to what exactly they had to manage. And so, we continue to do this. We continue to show what we expect our maintenance program to accomplish in the areas where they're working side by side with us. We show them what performance, again, these are not dollars. This is, lane miles of pavement, square footage of bridge, all the way down to ADA improvements that they already have in their portfolio and in their planning work plan. And then here in this red set of columns, this is what their project portfolio needs to achieve over those last 5 years. And at the very bottom, there's a budget at which they have to achieve that. So then the ball kind of shifts to our 12 districts, and they start putting projects together. And we have a tool, this is a custom developed tool that we use within Caltrans, and this is showing you one project. And what they do is they go in and they define the projects in their portfolio, and they will show us and define for us in data what the project is doing. So in this case, it's a pavement project, and we break our pavement down into 3 different classes, but don't get hung up on that. It's just a pavement project. And this pavement project is doing it's doing a 2-inch overlay in some different areas. And you can see the quantities of what they're doing. So they're doing about 20.6 lane miles of pavement, and it's here, and then here it's they're doing an additional 34 miles. They're showing what the condition is before, but when we program pavement and we put projects in, we are always programming based on expected deterioration, because again, we're setting up projects for 5 years from now. So even though it's good, it's anticipated to move into fair. We have some pavement already fair, and after the project, we expect this to be good. This is TPM, okay? This is where are we today? What do we expect after the project? But we also talk about what are we doing in terms of shoulder work? How many square feet of shoulder work is involved? What are we doing with crash cushions? What are we doing with drainage, guardrail, rumble strips, signing? So you could see this is a very comprehensive data picture, quantified using performance of what we expect to get after a project is complete. Okay, so the districts put those projects together, and we aggregate them in statewide into something that we call our 10-year project book. The project book is used to be a paper document. Now it's an online dashboard. It's available at this website, and it's open to the public. So the public can go in and look at all the projects that Caltrans is planning to work on for the coming 10 years. Not only can they look at them, there's GIS interface, so they can search them geographically. They can find projects based on keywords or specific activities that they may be interested in. And we allow them to download those projects into a spreadsheet if they wish. So fully transparent project development. Every quarter, we recertify that all of the projects that are in the portfolio meet the performance requirements and stay within the fiscal limits. And this is signed off by the district director, it's signed off by myself, and signed off by our chief financial officer in Caltrans. So this is a district level certification. If everything is green, and these, I know you can't read them, but these are the 33 different performance areas. If they're green, it means they've met the performance level. And then here on the right, we're showing a lot of financial information. How is the investment stratified over the last 5 years of the plan? Because remember, the first 5 years are already committed. Things, what is the support cost to capital expenditure ratios? And other things that our district directors can look at to get kind of a pretty good overview of what's going on with the aggregate of the project portfolio. This is the project dashboard. So again, this is open to the public, and you can do a number of things. You can find projects of interest to you. You can look at them in maps. You can connect to Street View if you want to get a Street View look of this. You can download a list of projects. You could download all the projects if you wanted to. You could search for projects by state and federal legislative and congressional districts, by metropolitan planning organization area, by county. So there's a lot of ways to kind of slice through all these projects to find the projects you're interested in. And then for every project, there is a contact phone number that the public could contact if they want to engage with Caltrans on that particular project. And we show the timeline of when the project's anticipated to be advertised for construction, and if the project's completed planning, what the estimated cost of the project is. So to round out our, so from the 10-year planning standpoint, it becomes really trivial for us to put forward a programming document to our commission. We just take the next set of projects that we're adding. We add 2 years at a time. They come out of a constrained plan. We know those constrained plan projects are going to meet our performance objectives, and we take them to the commission for programming in our shop. The commission is the entity in California that authorizes the expenditure of funds on the projects. And then to kind of close out this loop, we routinely monitor and track the performance. And we do this through something called a performance benchmark report. This is something that is publicly presented at our commission meeting in June of every year. So this is some excerpts from the performance benchmark report. You could see on the graph on the left that when we put the plan together in 2017, we made predictions of where we would be, which is this gray line. And then the shaded area represents the Monte Carlo band of uncertainty that we put on that predicted line. And then as we measure the condition, we change these to solid dots, this green. So you could see we're, in this case, for good pavement condition, we're actually doing a little bit better than we had predicted. But you could see that going through like 21, we were up here. Then from this point forward where it's hollow, these are predictions based on deterioration. So at the end, it's a TPM framework, but we're weaving in asset management here with deterioration. And then we show, what our target is, where we are, what the change was from the prior year. So again, fairly transparent. We also can show year over year information or aggregate inventory information. So in the case of pavement, we have 654 poor pavement lane miles at the time we did this report. Other than those 654, it was pretty close. A little bit more than 50% was good. We had a lot in fair, probably like many of you. So it gives you a fairly good understanding of what's happening with these assets out there. And then you could see the change over time. poor. So we implemented a big gas tax increase here. We saw a dramatic improvement. Now we're kind of at our steady state level, running, between a 1 and 1.5% poor on a statewide basis. And then I also always like to weave in the actual work, because sometimes, you can get lost in numbers and graphs, but really at the core of all of this is we are fixing pavements and paving highways and fixing bridges and other things. So I always weave in photos of ongoing construction or recently completed construction to really drive home that stuff is happening out there. We're a big state, and it's hard for everybody to see and be aware of everything that's going on statewide. So to kind of summarize all of this, we've implemented this comprehensive performance-based asset management approach. It includes risk. Okay, I didn't say risk-based asset management plan, but risks are part of this performance-based approach. When we implemented this, the culture really shifted in Caltrans. I've been with the department for a long time, and I know many years it was about, well, you have a budget, did you spend your money? Nobody talks like that in Caltrans anymore. What they talk about is, did you achieve your performance? Yes, you have to do it within a budget, but performance is in the front seat, budget is in the back seat. It considers all physical, well, not all physical assets. It considers the major physical assets: safety, operations, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, risk mitigation, climate resiliency, and more. We try to provide a high degree of transparency with the public, with our commission, and we certainly encourage project input because we think that leads to better projects. It helps us integrate things like equity, and it helps us integrate things like, community pride components into our projects as well. We think it provides a fairly accurate 10-year projections from this because we have 5 years worth of projects with defined performance and then 5 years of deterioration predictions after that. And so it gives us confidence that we're going to make progress towards our TPM goals or we're not. And we're doing all of this within the context of the asset management plan. These are all fiscally constrained. It's all based on deterioration if deterioration is applicable. And with respect to things like life cycle planning, these decisions that are being made at the project level are being done informed by our pavement management system, our bridge management system, and other inspection and analysis tools that are happening at the asset level. And then doing the annual performance review, again, it just gives us a regular opportunity to talk about how we're doing, the progress we're making. Sometimes we're not making progress, and I try to be very transparent about that. And if we're not making progress, we're generally recommending things to do to get back on the projections that we want to be on. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. There's a number of links here, my email. If you want to see the State Highway System Management Plan, it's available on that second link. And if you're interested in looking at our performance, our project dashboard, it's on that third link down below. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Mike. So there are a number of, comments and questions in the chat, Mike. So some are kind of technical, dealing with specific slides. Maybe I'll start with the last one. Actually, the one that just came in from Jocelyn Jones, I think is a good one. She's asking about culture. Can you speak about the lessons learned from managing this type of change from a cultural perspective? Challenges, opportunities, what's going well, what's not going well, how you overcame them?
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn. That's a great question. So when I took the position that I have now, I'm the first state asset management engineer Caltrans has ever had. Prior to me taking the job, we had tried asset management in 3 different divisions, and it didn't stick. So when my position was created, it was created in the director's office within Caltrans. In fact, I was hired by our chief deputy director, which is sort of the operational lead for the department. And so coming from a position in the director's office, I could affect more than I could have at, in any one division. So if I was in maintenance, we tried asset management in our administration program. We had tried it in maintenance. We had tried it in planning. And the truth is that TPM, asset management, are department-wide things. These 33 objectives that I talk about literally cover everything, or I'd say everything, but the vast majority of things that Caltrans does. So one lesson learned is you have to have the leadership in the right place in the organization. I think that's really critical. And then the other very critical thing that I think helped for the success is, you got to have a vision. So, you need a leader that can convey the vision and get people to buy into the vision. And it really helps when you're also managing the money, right? So you're doling out, in my case, we have $5 billion a year that we're spending across those 33 objectives. And so to be in a position where you can align your asset management, your performance management, business practices with qualifications for funding, that really helps. It's a lot of work. So what I laid out, when I started, I was one person, it grew to two. We now have asset managers in all 12 of our districts, and they have staff. So, it's not something that one person can do. It takes a bit, but it built, it took about 5 years to get to the place that we had an asset manager in every district. Now, I coordinate and meet with, all 12 of those asset managers on a monthly basis. We talk about all myriad of topics in asset management, performance management, project delivery, new programs that come into play like IIJA, things like that. So it's, these individuals in each district are in positions of leadership themselves at the district level. And then we sort of roll up and coordinate that at the state level. So those are, some of the challenges, some of these tools that I showed, and I got like the project dashboard. One of our staff here in headquarters developed that. So it takes innovative people, right? I'm not developing that dashboard, but to have a vision that we want it and then have people that can execute that is really important. So we have a great team, both, that work in, under the director's office of asset management, as well in each district. So you got to resource it, and you got to have people that are passionate about it. So those are some quick lessons learned.
And it sounds like also, I guess, the follow-up, I mean, that you have buy-in from executive leadership. So as the person at the top changes, right? You had Tokes in there at one point, and then he moved on. That the executive leadership has also bought into this as well and supports it.
Yeah,
in general.
Yes, no, it's true. In fact, in my role as a state asset manager, I am a member of our executive board.
Okay.
So I'm on the executive team, in addition to all 12 of our district directors and all of our deputy directors in headquarters and our chief safety officer and a few others. So yes, definitely have exec access and buy-in, and that's important.
Great. The next questions, there are a few that came in about the SHOP program, slide 10. How does Caltrans determine how much of their total, so there are sort of three different questions here. I'll take them one at a time. How does Caltrans determine how much of their total capital investment to target to SHOP?
So the available funding that's in the SHOP as a whole is a function of a lot of things, but most directly is the sale and tax on fuel in California. So that is an economic forecast that is done by the state's Department of Finance. It kind of set that this is what you have available. But from that big number, how do we decide how much goes to each of these things? That's kind of half science and half art. So we look at what the needs are in each of the areas unconstrained. And then we look at things like, what are we mandated to do by court order? So that's pretty high priority. What are we mandated to do by state law? That's high priority. Then what do we, what other specific performance objectives we have? Like I mentioned that we passed a gas tax. That gas tax has specific performance levels that have to be achieved for pavements and bridges, culverts and TMS elements. That's why we focus on those four, because in law, it says by 2027, you have to be at this condition level. And so those take a high priority. Other things that, the department prioritizes like safety. We've been doing a lot of kind of shifting a lot to get other modes of transportation available in California, sort of, I don't want to sort of ramp up, if you will, available bicycle and pedestrian transportation options, and to ramp up our investment in climate resiliency. So there's strategic shifts the department's making. So that comes into play, so all of this kind of comes together in a form of artistry that represents, what you're actually, going to put forward. And as we do that, we have some tools that we develop that allow us to see, what kind of performance we'll get relative to the unconstrained need at each investment level. And we can dynamically change those and see what the difference in performance will be. So it's very much an iterative process.
Right. And I guess follow on to the shop, that plan. So how frequently is it updated? And then does it take into account new developments such as increased traffic, sudden unexpected deterioration in the asset as sort of two examples?
Yeah, so the State Highway System Management Plan is updated every other year. And we do that in odd years. And each time we do it, we re-baseline it. In other words, we're doing a TPM analysis from the ground up each time. So we look at what is the current, fatal and serious injury count in this district. If there was a big growth or a big reduction, that will be reflected in that TPM analysis for that district. If all of a sudden, like we've had a lot of storms, if all of a sudden the pavement took a big hit for the worse, then our starting point for our performance gap analysis will be a worse condition, which means maybe we're going to have to do a little bit more in those gap years. And so that's all redone every 2 years.
Great. And then Ramon is the person that asked that one. I'm not sure if you have any follow on to that. I should have said that in the beginning. I'll try to articulate the question or say the question, but if the person who asked it has a follow on, turn your camera on and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer. I do have a follow-up question. That you're doing every 2 years in building for the ground up is fantastic. But do you take into account anything resembling emergencies or bridge collapses? How is that to be taken into account? Emergency maintenance or something similar?
Yeah, thank you. So I mentioned that we have those 3 different performance models, and one of those is what we call a reservation model. So for those emergency type situations, we're in effect holding funds for an emergency. We don't know if it'll be on a bridge. We don't know if it'll be a culvert or a rock slide. We don't know what the emergency will be, but we're holding funds based on what we've historically spent. Once we undertake a specific activity, like if we were to replace a bridge in an emergency project for some reason, then when we go do the next plan, that bridge will show up as good. So it'll be reflected in
Of course.
the ground up analysis as an asset in good condition.
And what percentage would that be of the total budget for investing in your asset?
Emergencies?
Yeah,
Well,
approximately.
it fluctuates by year, but in terms of percentage, we are carving out a reservation initially of about $500 million a year out of 5 billion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Some other interesting questions here, I guess, from Ping Lu. So talking about the framework, and do pavement and bridge/tunnel compete for funding, or is funding pre-divided into two sets, one for roadway/pavement and the other set for structures?
Yeah, great question. And again, just to remind folks, the way we structure this, we don't provide our districts pavement money and bridge money. We give them a single budget and we give them a set of performance they have to accomplish. So, that's a little different than a lot of agencies where they're basically taking the money and they're siloing the money by asset. We don't do it that way. We look at the performance and then we estimate what the performance is that we expect that district to achieve, and we price out what we think it's going to take to achieve that performance. That's how we develop their budgets. There is a little bit of contingency in that budget that they all get for things. And so when you look at something like a bridge, some bridges are more expensive, some are less expensive, but again, they're managing, in a sense, new projects over a 5-year period. There's generally a mix of work, and they get to work, they're working with our bridge program, our pavement program, but in effect, we don't tell them where to work in their district. We figure they're local to the district. They know what the needs are in the district better than we do sitting in Sacramento. So that decision is left to them. But it's within the context of our bridge and pavement management system. So we're not dividing up the money by objective or asset class. We build it from the ground up that way, but we deliberately don't provide a number because we don't want to encourage that silo-based thinking. In fact, we go out of our way to encourage our districts, and it's way more cost effective to do multiple assets at one time in a corridor of a project rather than doing a bridge project and then coming back and doing the pavement leading up to that bridge in a separate project.
So I think there's an interesting question from Catherine Duffy following on to that. So you mentioned, Mike, that sort of the central office gives the performance to the districts, simplifying things. What role might the districts have in what that performance should be or that target that they need to achieve? Is there some sort of a conversation that happens, or are they just given it and then they have to try to figure out how to meet it?
Well, as we develop our state highway system management plan, at each step along the way, we ask the districts to validate things like, okay, here's the inventory. Can you validate, please review and validate the inventory. So they have an opportunity to tell us the inventory is right or it's wrong. Then when we get into, the unit cost that we're using to estimate the cost of doing the work, they have an opportunity to weigh in on that, and we work with them on that. But the short answer is no, they don't get to decide how much money they get, while they'll have some input on the statewide investment plan and the statewide needs assessment, they review both. They don't really get to say what their district's portion is, because the district portion is really just a proration of how much of the gap we're able to fund at a statewide level that exists in each of those districts. So that's a lot, but let me simplify it. Let's take something like a roadside rest. Our district in the Los Angeles area doesn't have a single roadside rest. So if in our statewide plan, we're going to put money to roadside rest, they're not going to get any because they don't have any of that asset, right? So they don't get to say, well, I need money for roadside rest. If you don't have it, you're not maintaining it, you're not going to get the funding for it. Other districts that have a lot of roadside rest, they're going to get money in that particular area. So it is really, we develop an investment plan statewide. It's literally, mathematically exactly prorated out to the districts in accordance with how much of the gap that we're funding that they own.
Okay. Thanks for that. So again, if you have other questions, I'll try to take them as they come. From PK, I think in Oregon, is there a point in the future where culverts and reservoirs could be combined under Caltrans, both being assets? Water movement / storage and snowmelt greatly affect Caltrans assets, especially with the huge water, California has received, or the amount of precipitation, I guess, California has received this month.
To my knowledge, there's no discussions to do that. In California, we have our own state Department of Water Resources that manage some waterways and some reservoirs. We have utilities that manage other reservoirs and waterways. And then we have federal entities that also manage aqueducts and dams and other things. It's quite complex. So to my knowledge, there's no discussion to try to integrate that with the drainage systems on the state highway system.
Okay. Another question, and I know PK, if you wanted to any follow up to that before I move on.
No, thanks. Appreciate
right.
the question.
Yeah. All right. The next one. So talking about the project book, connecting the project book with asset performance is a brilliant idea. In your project dashboard, are you sharing the performance, the 33 metrics, with the public? How about financial information?
Yeah. So the project dashboard is, again, it's like this 10-year forward look of everything that's going to go to construction. And it includes the costs of projects that have either been programmed or have completed planning. If they're still in a concept stage, meaning they haven't gone into formal project planning, then the cost will be shown as to be determined. We have internal cost estimates, but it's probably premature to make those publicly available. And then up at the top of that dashboard page, there is another tab that allows you to see all of the individual performance items that are defined for each project. And I showed you the one example of one project, but the available activities that can be defined for a project are more than several hundred could be there. So if you go, if you were to go to the dashboard, up at the very top, you'll see a tab that says performance. You can click on it and it'll give you that expanded view that shows you all of the detail quantities of what's being done within each project on that in that project dashboard. And we allow it all to be downloaded into a spreadsheet.
Great. Sharing is caring, right?
It's their money, right? It's the people's money.
So there was Louis Fegans asked a question to follow on to the emergency, or you call it the reservation aspect, the reservation model. Do you think once you hit your targets that you can reduce your emergency funds, or I guess those reservation funds? I get that. That's what you're calling them.
Yeah, I mean, emergencies are the reservation, the dollars that we set aside for, what we call major damage that occurs. It's quite variable. This year it's been really substantial. Other years it's not. And so it's largely weather driven, event driven. Just in the last storm alone, I mentioned we incurred about $200 million worth of damage on the state highway system in California. That's one storm. We are projecting to be on the order of $1 billion for this fiscal year in damage from storms primarily. So what happens if the damage exceeds the reservation, right? That's a possibility. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes we underexpend, sometimes we overexpend. You know, it's quite variable and unpredictable. That's why it's a reservation. We adapt to that by some different strategies in the way we fund our projects. And so we're, you know, able to do sort of near-term stretching a little bit, you know, in hopes that in the next year it's going to be a little bit less and so forth. So, you know, it's a little complex in terms of how the accounting occurs, but it's not like that's a hard cap. I mean, we put a number in there just to hold some money aside, because if we don't, then we would be allocating it out in targets to our districts and they would be developing projects against it. And then we don't want to be developing projects that we ultimately can't fund.
Great. Thanks for that. And Louis, I'm not sure if you wanted to have anything follow on with Mike, just turn your camera on. Seeing nothing, hearing nothing. So Matt Halbrook had another good question. I'm going to try to get this one right, Matt, but if you need to elaborate, let me, please turn your camera on. But can you share a little bit, so not to bounce around, we're going back to the district target setting, that partnership. Can you share a little bit about how you estimate the performance benefits that will result from the investments the districts have selected, how they know how much each dollar will move the needle on the performance measures?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we give a budget to the districts with performance. They have to define projects. And when they define each project, they're defining, well, they're not defining what the current condition is, but we're pulling that from asset systems, but they're having to put in what the expected outcome is. So if we're going to do a pavement job, and the pavement starts in fair condition, which is fairly common for us, is it gonna, you know, land in good condition when it's done? Or if it starts in poor, is it gonna land in fair or good? So we let them define that. And then we have our headquarters units they have an opportunity to come in and, in a sense, review that performance prediction. So in the case of pavement, our pavement program gives those predictions to our district. So if you do this treatment on this segment, this is what your resulting condition will be. In other areas, like I think when I last presented, we were talking about how we're doing safety. So we have a little tool that calculates the estimated reduction in fatal and serious injuries based on where a project is and the safety treatments that are being proposed. And we use crash modification factors to estimate what the safety benefit of that work will be. And so they're required to complete that tool. Our safety program reviews what they're doing to make sure that, you know, we're not gaming the performance, right? But we haven't really had that situation occur. I mean, I think since we have asset managers in all districts, we're all really trying to work together for the, you know, for the comprehensive good of the state. You know, so anyway, the short answer is, you know, there are tools that we have. In some cases, you know, it's obvious that we're going to build something brand new. It's going to be in good condition. But there are other cases where it's a little gray, and sometimes there's conversations that occur with our, you know, our headquarters programs that they don't really have a financial skin in the game, so they can be kind of that subject matter unbiased perspective sometimes.
Matt, I see you got your camera on. Any follow-up to Mike?
Oh, I think that's helpful. You know, I think this is one of the biggest barriers that I have been hearing around the whole idea of performance management, is sort of having that understanding of how are the projects we're doing affecting performance. And so it's great to hear the approach that Caltrans is using for that. It gives some great ideas for maybe how we could work towards solving those problems in other scenarios. So yeah, thanks for sharing that information. I guess the only thing I'm a little curious about is you kind of mentioned, Mike, that these various groups are kind of reviewing the projects. So I'm assuming that there has to be some kind of you know, I kind of think about the project development cycle, and when you're first kind of proposing a project, you have a certain concept of kind of what it's going to do. And then as the project is kind of developed and concepted and developed towards final design, that gets more and more refined. So can you comment a little bit about the project stage or project development lifecycle, and kind of where in the lifecycle do you guys try to evaluate those benefits, or is it at multiple points in the lifecycle of a development?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, you know, we kind of look at it at 4 different main milestones. So,
Okay.
you know, in the earliest stages, our districts are proposing concepts that haven't gone through planning at all. So here's what we're talking, you know, this is what we want to do. This is the performance that we think we're going to get. But it really hasn't been fully vetted, particularly the costs, right?
Yeah.
We do have a cost estimating worksheet that is, you know, kind of a guided worksheet that helps them get to reasonable costs. But that's sort of the first stage, is sort of that concept stage. Then when it go from that concept stage, it'll go into formal planning. And that's where we're going to start looking at what kind of right-of-way costs are we going to have, you know, what kind of utilities we might need to relocate, you know, and you start getting a lot more granular in the project. You might start getting advanced planning studies done for, you know, for structures, or, you know, get a little bit clearer picture on what the design will be. So once formal planning is done and the project's ready to program, we reassess performance there, because sometimes scope goes up. Along that process, there's usually community meetings, and sometimes scope gets added that wasn't there at the concept stage that gets, you know, gets layered in. And then we'll program the project. Once the project gets programmed and it goes into our design phases, there are times when in the design process, going through the environmental process, that the changes get introduced. And those are also reflected in performance. So we have these snapshots at concept stage, completion of formal planning, then at going, you know, sort of current status as it goes through design, and then to meet some requirements of our inspector general that was put in place when the gas tax was put in place. We have a closeout performance when construction's complete. So at that point, it's the same performance definition. We just snapshot it, it evolves, but then it ultimately goes to the person that oversaw the construction, and they sign off that all this was done. And in fact, even if there's any change orders in construction, that can be reflected and updated in the performance.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
There was a follow-on question to Matt's original question about being able to estimate performance, and, you know, given modeling performance and what you're going to get out of that from Catherine Duffy. And it's about the tools that you mentioned. Can you provide more details on the performance output tools that you mentioned? Was this created in-house? More information about them, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I showed the one tool in the presentation here. This tool is an internal developed tool. So this, again, just to kind of reorient everybody. Oops. Sorry about this. Close your eyes. Okay, so this tool here, this is a internally developed tool, and you can see in this tool is where our districts go in and they create projects and they define what the project's doing. And you can see there's different tabs here. In this case, you know, this project includes pavement and signs and lighting, some complete streets. And so those have been identified. And here are the specific quantities, you know, pre and post conditions that are anticipated for these projects. And you could see here, what we're looking at here, this is at CCA. So this is at the completion of construction. So this is, a contract completion and closeout. So this is sort of the final performance that this project yield. This, I could, if I was in the software, I could drop this down and I could look at how this performance has changed from the concept all the way through the completion of construction. But short answer is this was internally developed. I mentioned that there was a tool that we assess the safety benefits of a project. And Matt mentioned at the onset of this that was the subject of a webinar. And I don't know, Matt, if you could fill in that it's on TPM, but they can go back and look at that tool. That's an Excel spreadsheet that was developed by our traffic safety program in Caltrans, working with asset management. And we've just sort of embedded it in our business process because it's completely consistent with our performance management approach.
Great.
So those are a couple examples.
And I think the presentation that we mentioned, I think it was the TPM webinar number 15 that happened a couple months ago. And again, if you go to tpm-portal.com and click on the archived webinars, all of those, the presentations, the recordings are there. So two more questions that so far kind of interesting. So one is from Richard Dune. So talking about congestion as so is traffic congestion a performance metric? Is it tied to the traffic management assets? If so, how do you account for this sort of synergy between the two?
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Yeah, it's a good question. So we have an objective that we call operational improvement. And so if you look really detailed at those performance plans, there's an operational improvement. The metric is daily person hours of delay. So that's the performance measure that we use. And there are a number of strategies to improve or to reduce person hour of delay. It could come from making operational improvements like ramp meters and things on the system. It could come from construction of acceleration and deceleration lanes on the highway system, truck climbing lanes. It could come from implementing a managed lane system or proposing to implement a managed lane system. It could come from things like transit priority, getting onto the freeway, because here you start moving a lot of people. So it's not highway centric. It's meant to be about throughput. We are trying to reduce the delay of moving people from point A to point B. And so our metric is that. And we let the districts determine what strategies that they want to employ to reduce delay. And so we don't constrain them, and different districts do it different ways. In some of our very, urbanized areas, they're looking really heavily at things like managed lane and transit priority. And in some of our more rural areas, they may be looking at truck climbing lanes as a way to reduce delay. And so the metric is, what we strive to do in all of our objectives is get to that sort of fundamental objective, where you say, well, I want to put a managed lane in. Well, why do you want to put a managed lane in? Well, I want to, improve travel times. Okay, well, that is measured by delay. Why do you want to put a truck climbing lane in? Because people are getting stuck behind slow moving trucks going uphill. So it's a delay metric, right? So in all cases, our objectives are really trying to get at that biggest, broadest, overarching thing we're trying to achieve as a department. We could probably have a whole conversation, and maybe next time I see you, we can, if I didn't hit it on the mark. Great,
thanks. And that was TAM webinar number 61. Is the one that you were talking about the safety performance measures and metrics and tools. So Lori put a link to that in the chat there for people. All right, last question that I have with dealing with geotechnical engineers from Dennis Neff. How are Caltrans geotechnical engineers involved in slope asset management? Do they try to proactively assess slope conditions and needs as part of the overall asset management plan process?
Yeah, it's a great question. you know, I think that's an area where there's room for improvement for us. We do have a pretty robust geotechnical group that looks at this. You know, we're kind of looking at this sort of in the vein of climate resiliency, because it's really affecting a lot of our highways, because we have a lot of rainfall or excessive precipitation, and all of a sudden, you know, right now we've got one of our coastal state highways closed off. In a few weeks ago, we had communities completely severed because we had slides on both sides of that community blocking the state highway system. So you know, it is something that we have some expertise in within the department. It's one of those areas, kind of like wildfire, where we're working a lot in that area, or working towards that within sort of our overarching climate resiliency. You know, and certainly if there's needs, you know, if a slide happens, then we're covering it through our reservation for damage. So we're paying either proactively or reactively out of the same pot of money. But we would like to get to the place where those geotechnical risks are defined statewide and can sit there alongside sea level rise risk and wildfire risks and seismic risks and everything else. But it's, you know, it's an area that we're still maturing in, probably like many of the people attending this webinar today.
Great. So that was the last question that I had, or people have asked. I just want to, before we kind of start wrapping things up, any other last minute questions? You can turn your camera on and say something as opposed to typing it. Going once, twice. All right. Well, Mike, thank you very much for that. We're going to the wrap up. So Lori, if you want to share your screen with some of the wrap up slides. I guess for everyone, Mike, thank you very much for being here today and taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with everybody what Caltrans is doing, and also for being a great friend and everything over my past, 12, 13 years I've been here at AASHTO working with Caltrans and you and everybody. And thanks to everybody who for being here on the webinar today. Again, materials can be found at the TPM portal. Everybody at the same time, tpm-portal.com. They're probably up there right now, except for the video recording, which takes a little bit of time to sort of process. Going into the future, we would love to hear your ideas for webinars and different topics, different formats and structures. Again, we have sort of two different ideas for these. One is breadth, where we get many different speakers to cover sort of address a topic, and this was an example of going more depth, right, into sort of one particular application or one particular state, being Caltrans. So if you have any ideas for topics or anything like that, please let us know. You can send us an email. I'm going to try to think of like what email address, but if you go to the TPM portal, you can actually submit your ideas that way. So please let us know what your ideas are. Again, thanks again to Mike. We also want to thank the TPM Pooled Fund Lead and AASHTO CPBM Committee on Performance-Based Management Chair Christos Xenofontos, along with the Vice Chair Gene Wallace, and all the other Pooled Fund members and TSP members for supporting this webinar series through their financial contributions. I sound like NPR at this point, but these types of events, knowledge sharing and everything, professional development couldn't be done without your contributions to either the pooled fund or the TSP. So we thank you very much for that. And again, to that end, please continue to support the webinar series by signing up for the TSP. If you have any questions about that, you can send an email to me in the next 3 hours, and I'll be able to let you know kind of what's going on. After that, you can reach me at mhardy, it's just a different last name, at spypondpartners.com, and I'm happy to put you in touch with whomever at AASHTO is going to kind of take over. And with that, I think I'm going to just call it a day. Again, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us in these very important discussions and dialogues. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all that you do. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, everybody.